In mid-December 2024, the world said goodbye to a man I knew and admired, the world-renowned drummer Zakir Hussain. He was revered as the finest modern tabla player and the man who brought Indian drumming out of the shadows. I felt he revolutionized the use of the baya drum, making it perform as a melodic instrument, like a Western timpani or African talking drum. For 50 years, I was a student and devotee of the great Bansuri master G.S. Sachdev ji until his passing. Sachdev and Zakir performed together many times. They had different ideas on the role of Indian classical music in the modern world, but also had a great friendship and respect for each other. Sachdev was someone Zakir truly honored. When I was with the two of them, Zakir and I often chatted and had a very friendly relationship. My first interaction with live Indian music was at the Monterey Pop Festival. I was a high schooler of 16 at the time and knew so little other than what I heard on the radio. When Ravi Shankar performed with Zakir's father, Allah Raka Khan, on the tabla, he stunned the rock and roll audience into complete silence and adulation. In a concert of wild rockers such as Jimi Hendrix and The Who, Shankar's music felt inspirational, and I felt reached a depth of musicality that the other performers weren't capable of. Little did I know what a profound effect it would have on me shortly.
I think the second day after I was born, the tradition was the father is supposed to recite a prayer in the baby's ear. So he takes me in his arm, puts his lips to my ear, and recites rhythms. He did dhagitete, dhagitete, kirdatete, and my mother was livid. She said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to say, prayers, not these rhythms." And he said, "But these are my prayers. This is how I pray." He said, "I am a worshipper of Goddess Saraswati, Lord Ganesha, and this is a devout Muslim talking. And this is the knowledge or vidya I got from my teachers, and I want to pass it on to my son. He is going to do exactly this. So why not start him early and give him these prayers?" So I had no say in it. Whatever, you're going to actually hear dha, din, na, and like it or not. So by the time I was 3, when I could actually reach the tabla, I already had all this information in my head. And so that's when the tabla was put in front of me and I started to hit it. At that point, my father decided to use reverse psychology. So now instead of putting rhythms in my ear, he just disappeared. No more learning or hearing those nice little things which put me to sleep. I was suddenly having to fend for myself. And I guess his whole plan was not to, overdose me with the stuff so I would just go away and not want it. It was more like giving me a little taste of it, and then he pulled back to see what I was going to do with it. At that age, I was being put on a spot to make a decision. My instinct brought me to commit to it. If I didn't have the tabla, I would steal my mother's pots and turn them around and play. That's how it all began. At the age of 3 till when I was 7, I rarely saw my dad.
Zakir and I both loved Indian music. He grew up in that world, I seeking it. I always thought it ironic that he, the son of the famous tabla player Allah Raka Khan, came to the West looking to find a rock and roll lifestyle, while I was looking for the deep history and peace of Indian music. We were 2 young men on crossing paths, each enchanted by the other's culture. Ali Akbar Khan, the famous Indian sarod player, saw the love for Indian culture in California and opened a school of Indian music in Marin County. He invited many pillars of Indian music and dance, including the young tabla prodigy Zakir Hussain, to teach at his academy. Musicians like Sachdev, who lived under the yoke of historical restrictions at home, were able to blossom in freedom in the U.S. In the 70s, Zakir was being recognized as unique among Indian drummers, running in the same circles as Ravi Shankar George Harrison, and the electric guitarist, John McLaughlin. I was a young man just out of my teens when I began studying with Sachdev. Zakir had been in the U.S. for a few years, teaching at the school and living in Nevada with Mickey Hart, the drummer for the Grateful Dead. Zakir and Hart worked together all their lives to expand the world of drumming. Much of world music comes from the friendship of these two men and their explorations. Many of the girls at the school studied dance with Chitras Das, a Kathak-style dancer, and all of us young men were enamored with him. I noticed one young lady caught Zakir's eye. He was able to woo and marry the lovely dancer, Antonia Minicola. They remained together all their lives and had 2 daughters together. Zakir was a master who could play the finest classical music, but also rock out with Western bands. His music harkens back to the divine source, and he could touch the hearts of everyday person, as well as the purest. He always felt he could bring the divine to the common listener. In Indian classical rags, the tabla was considered the driver of the bus, not the navigator laying out the path. For many years, tabla players were not even credited on recordings, and Zakir was very self-effacing, espousing the thought in numerous interviews. But through his cleverness and subtle adjustments, he brought the tabla up to an equal level in classical music, and that cleverness brought new listeners to the form. I feel that for Indian classical music to be really heard and appreciated, it needs to be performed in an intimate setting of musicians and audience. Unlike Western classical, with its symphony halls, there is a direct harmony between the ensemble and the listeners. Zakir was able to adjust between the two worlds, playing as prayer or as an entertainment. Sachdev taught me the music should focus on being prayerful. Zakir respected this point of view and played accordingly with Sachdev. In 1989, I visited India in my studies of Indian music. I met up with Zakir when he was home in Mumbai. We met at his house, and I watched him work at the famous Indian recording studio, his master's voice. He was there to play tabla for the Santoor musician Shriv Kumar Sharma. We later went on a river tour together with Vijay Kuchru, Executive Director of ITC Samgeet Research Academy for Indian Classical Music. Zakir did some commercials for Taj Mahal teas, which made him a household name in India. He had a common touch that everyone identified with.
बोलो किसे हवा में उड़ाऊं?
मुझे नहीं भैया, रूबी.
ध्यान लगाओ.
Hey.
Hey, what about me?
पहले ताज.
बाकी सब उसके बाद.
Right.
And he brought his work to a whole new audience. Everywhere we went in India, Zakir was recognized and treated like a beloved rock star. Zakir revolutionized the tabla, moving it from an accompanist instrument to a solo instrument. He was always innovating, finding ways to improvise, but able to get back to the first beat, the sum of the rhythmic cycle. They might play 20 cycles of improvisation, but the tabla player always gets everyone back to the first beat, to sum. He was always aware, though, when to step back from that equal spotlight. Zakir said that one of his most memorable performances was playing simple rhythm, Teka, with Ali Akbar Khan. He was honored to be on stage with the master, able to place himself in the role of master of simplicity. Only by knowing the rules intimately was he able to improvise on them and revolutionize them. We met many times when he performed with Sachdev, and Zakir even tried to teach tabla to my sons, though it didn't stick. I don't think my boys recognized they were getting lessons from someone who was basically Mozart. One of the stories Sachdev and I always loved was when Zakir was coming from San Rafael in Marin down to Berkeley to play with Sachdev in concert. Zakir was casual, and Sachdev was always very by the book. Sachdev and I showed up at the venue 1.5 hours before the show to make sure everything was perfect. Zakir was supposed to be there as well, but wasn't showing up. As the time counted down, we were starting to worry. Finally, 10 minutes before the performance, Zakir breezed in. He explained that he had forgotten to get money to cross the bridge to Berkeley and had to turn around and drive back home. It was only later, after the concert, that we calmed down enough to realize it didn't cost anything to cross the bridge from San Rafael to Berkeley. He was probably just late. In the future, whenever we knew we were going to meet with him, we chalked up his lateness to having to drive back home. He played with laughter and passion and always had a way to draw you in with his personality. He seemed to have a psychic line to the other musicians, and no one drove a rag like him. Loss of a teacher is a different type of loss, unlike that of a friend or loved one. It has a unique intimacy in that a teacher helps you grow in ways others can't. When I watched him work, he was a wellspring of joy and humor and was loved by those who knew him. For his students, this was a terrible blow. When a beloved teacher is gone, his work remains, both his recordings and interviews, but also his teachings and ideas, which are passed on through his students as they teach the next generation of artists. I did not work with him as a teacher, but he was always to me a friend.